gagging, brutalized, humiliation, torture, screaming, teen destroyed, extreme anal destroyed, plastic bag suffocation, painful anal gangbang, extreme choke, I can't breathe. All of these terms had thousands of results.
Welcome back to LustCast. Today's guest is Helen Taylor from anti-sex trafficking organisation Exodus Cry. And we're going to be talking about some of the really difficult issues that have come up in a film that Exodus Cry have just made. I think most people would be really surprised to see us talking. And I think it's fair to say that we've struck up a friendship recently. And I've mentioned on the podcast before, like how much support you've given me when people in the industry didn't. I think just to kick things off, maybe it's worth just explaining a little bit about what Exodus Cry do.
Yeah, and just even for the context, so you reached out to us a few weeks ago, and we did a call, and of course we're both British, and I think for both of us it's been a really cool conversation and finding points of real connection and agreement, and so very grateful for you to even ask me on this podcast. And yeah, I've worked for Exodus Cry for 10 years and
10 years, wow.
Got into doing this anti-trafficking work even a few years before that. So from quite a young age as a teenager, discovered this was something that I felt incredibly passionate about and felt like there was no greater abuse or evil on the planet that I could think of than sex trafficking and someone being systemically abused and someone else profiting financially from that. And so I did a course in art therapy after graduating from university, moved to Cambodia, worked with victims of sex trafficking there. And while I was living there, saw the first documentary that Exodus Cry ever made. And we did a watch party of the film at the house that I was living at, and some of the women in our program featured in the documentary. And so even though I'd never met Benji, who made the film, I just felt very, very connected to the film and the organization. And then they did a tour of the film in the UK. So this is the film called Notorious, Merchant of Souls. It's about the global sex trade and sex trafficking. And as a result of me connecting with someone at the London premiere, I moved out to Kansas City, where the organization was for many years. We've relocated to California. And because Benji is a filmmaker, yes, his background, we make films and documentaries really as a way to shift the culture and educate people. And then what's been really cool is seeing the films be used to improve anti-trafficking laws around the world and be shown in different parliament contexts and universities and before the UN. And a lot of anti-trafficking organizations started as a result of that film. We've had probably over 100 emails over the years from different individuals who told us they got into the anti-trafficking field because of that film. And so films and documentaries, campaigns and improving anti-trafficking laws, and then direct outreach to people being exploited in sex trafficking or in different areas of the sex industry. And so that was my role for many years, was taking teams to everywhere where the sex industry existed and offering women support services, lifelines for anyone who needed that or was in that situation and didn't want to be in it. And then we would help connect them to resources and next steps. So that's, in a nutshell, what Exodus Cry does and how I got connected to them.
That's a really amazing thing you're doing. And I don't think people in the porn industry even know about that. Like, before I spoke to you, my impression was that, like, I literally thought you'd been set up just to stop Pornhub. Because the first time I'd heard of you was on the Trafficking Hub campaign.
Yeah, which you're sporting with a t-shirt.
I felt it was very, because I said to you, before, I think the listeners would want to know as well, that I bought this to wear ironically and just annoy my porn industry colleagues. And I bought a lot of them. I bought a lot of no-fap t-shirts, and didn't expect, I just misunderstood this one so much. And I think probably the entire porn industry misunderstands what you do. Because I think we instinctively get very defensive whenever anyone is critical of our industry. And obviously you guys have been critical of our industry. When the Trafficking Hub campaign started, I felt it was incredibly unfair. But you weren't wrong, and you were proven right. Especially, I think the amateur stuff we could turn a blind eye to more because we thought that's not the porn industry. And people uploading illegal content, it happens on Twitter, it happens on other social networks, so it felt unfair to single out Pornhub. But when the girls do porn stuff happened, when we saw what was happening in France, what we saw was happening in the Czech Republic with sex trafficking in the porn industry, we were like, oh, actually they've been right all along. And I don't think many in the porn industry have admitted that to themselves yet. Like, I've only just realized, and I'm still comprehending it. I haven't processed it at all.
Yeah.
So I don't.
And I think a lot of people were like, well, is it really Pornhub's fault? It's the fault of the people who upload these videos. But there has to get to a point, like, I think if you own a house and sex trafficking is happening in your house, even if you're not the one physically doing the abusing, there's a point where you have to take accountability. If you're knowing that it's happening in your house, you're profiting from it happening in your house. And it can be proven that you're knowing. And even when the victims are asking you for help or saying, please call the police, you're cutting the phone lines. And it felt like over the course of 2020, the number of victims that we had reaching out to us who had non-consensual videos on Pornhub and had such a rough time getting those taken down, it destroyed their lives. And I think the greatest misunderstanding is probably the motivation of why we do what we do, and that we really care about people. And when we see exploitation happening that's ruining people's lives, and then a company like MindGeek taking zero accountability, just dismissing it as, oh, don't listen to them. They believe in God, they have a faith, therefore dismiss their critique of everything we're doing, even if it's illegal. Just don't listen. They just try to distract. And the day that they deleted 80% of their website, we got several messages from survivors who said, like, I can breathe again. And I just checked for like the however many time, because up until that point, Pornhub had a download button. And so even if someone was able to get videos taken down, those videos could be re-uploaded. And just, I mean, I still feel scarred by the phone calls that we received of girls and women whose lives had been destroyed by that website. And I think it's, you know, Pornhub isn't just one of so many websites. Like MindGeek have the monopoly on most of the porn sites and companies. And so it just felt like if even Pornhub and MindGeek aren't taking accountability, like, what hope is there? Like, a lot of people think Pornhub is this mainstream site where nothing illegal is on it. And anyway, the shut it down came from this op-ed that my colleague Lila Mickleway at the time released, saying it's time to shut down Pornhub. And we released this this petition. And I think, like, the language, it was abrasive. And for anyone in the industry, like, we I really want people to hear our heart is to go after abuse and exploitation. And even if we are really troubled and concerned by things we see in the porn industry and the distribution elements, and we have a critique on porn or a critique of how it can negatively harm and impact some people, our legal objectives aren't to, like, ban everyone in porn and make it all illegal and a criminal enterprise. Like, I think a lot of people assume that those are our legal objectives, and that's actually not what we're about.
Even after I spoke to you, and I'm just like, I've like been messaging with you or chatting with you, and you've been driving around the streets of LA, like helping, girls that work on the streets, and like, so obviously I understand that you're not, like, that's not what you're focused on. You're focused more on helping victims. But when I read your website, I even kind of saw what I wanted to see. And I took like the word abolitionist, which you're referring to slavery, and I applied it to my own industry, because in the porn industry, we have this mentality where anyone outside, we don't think they understand us, we feel attacked. And often laws are passed specifically against us, or there's regulations from banks that apply to us, but not other people. So we do feel a lot of discrimination. I think we end up being very blinkered and not having conversations with people outside the industry. And yeah, I've justified so many things to myself which are clearly wrong now, that where I thought I was being a good person before. So it's really difficult. It's
Wow.
just,
I just
yeah.
think that the fact that you even reached out to us, being in that industry and having that impression of us that you did at that time, was, I mean, that was really interesting and surprising to me. And I was like, I really want to speak to this guy and hear what's going on and what he's about. And just, you were at a moment where you were uncovering some really intense things, and knew that we were someone who would, or I was someone that would want to hear and be able to support that. And I just think it's really easy to turn a blind eye to things, and it takes tremendous courage to be willing to actually look at something really uncomfortable, especially if it's going to disrupt your life in some way. And I'm really encouraged by just the journey that you've been on, and really grateful that you did reach out.
I was even more surprised than you, believe me, but I didn't know what to do, because the companies involved, like MindGeek, for example, in the industry, we see those as the good guys. Without Pornhub, the more independent producers like me, we wouldn't have had a route to market. So like, we exist because of Pornhub, and they have like the highest moral standards in the industry. So like, what does that say about the rest, you know? So in a way, we look up to them. And then with the other company that was involved, Gamma, they're maybe even more ethical. They don't own tube sites. They only have like mostly in-house productions, or productions they control very tightly. And so when I reported on a problem, I thought they would investigate it and stop it happening right away. And when they didn't, I was just like, I didn't know what to do. I was so shocked, and I was like, should I? I felt like I was betraying my industry, betraying my colleagues by even talking to you. It just shows how misunderstood your organization is. So it was just such a strange journey.
I think as well, like, since we really took on Pornhub, there's a lot of people who make a lot of money in this industry and from Pornhub. And I mean, the guys at the top of MindGeek were living in multi-million-dollar mansions, and like the money that they bring in, like, is huge. And we are a pretty small nonprofit. Throughout 2020, there was about 10 of us on our whole team, really working on this campaign that we weren't really planning to do. It was that op-ed that my colleague at the time, Lila, wrote that sort of went viral. And from then on, the fact that like the next day the BBC released a report of a survivor story, I think that was what created this international spark. And so throughout that whole year, like the petition going viral, and we made this animated video that got like 34 million views worldwide. And I think it was at a time when Pornhub was already in the news because of COVID, and people were spending more time online, and they did that thing where they offered free subscriptions to anyone. And I think it just hit that viral vein of the company that was the most known, like as far as porn sites. And yeah, it took off more than anything that we could have expected. But it meant that suddenly a lot of haters came out of the woodwork. A lot of journalists started writing some really ludicrous things about us that were like flagrantly untrue. And, you know, in those moments, you kind of think, oh my gosh, should we consider suing this this publication for saying such untrue things about us. But then it's like, when you're a small
I'm having the same
charity,
thing.
yeah. But it's like, I would rather our finances go to actually supporting and helping victims and survivors than get embroiled in lawsuits. But it's definitely been a new mental space to have to navigate, of people misunderstanding you, hating you, lying about you, but also being like, you know what? I didn't get into doing this work to make people like me. Like our greater motivation is bringing justice and bringing like freedom and healing for people who've been affected by this industry. And just knowing that the regulations that we're calling for, we feel really strongly that there does need to be more regulation on this industry, and the amount of like harm it has caused to people's lives, not only in the industry, but children who are being exposed underage. But Pornhub definitely, when they took down the 10 million videos, they mentioned our organization in their statement, and they thought that was, their intention was to insult us, but it was a really proud moment, because it was like, they've removed all their unverified videos, like riddled with abuse, non-consensual content. Like, Nick Kristof in the New York Times found non-consensual content within 10 minutes of unconscious women whose eyeballs were being touched in the videos to show that they were unconscious. Like, so many videos were abusive, and the fact that those were forced to be taken down. And anyway, it's still all unfolding. I feel like that the chapter on what's happened with Pornhub, we're still in the midst of seeing what's going to happen with the company. And that's only like one part. Yeah.
See, yeah, this is the thing, because I noticed like Lila is still pushing hard on Pornhub. And I was thinking, haven't you won? But like, what's the goal?
Yeah, no, great question. I think a couple of things, like firstly, just improving your own website and is good. We celebrate all progress. But it doesn't mean that you are absolved from criminal consequences. If criminal acts have taken place that can be proven, I think she feels like, for the sake of the victims, that there needs to be a criminal justice element to holding the perpetrators accountable who worked at MindGeek and were negligent in a criminal way. And so, and there's like around 200 victims currently suing MindGeek. And so pursuing civil litigation and those lawsuits, the Girls Do Porn lawsuit, there have been some resolutions, but a lot of survivors are still waiting for a form of justice. And then we need to see laws passed that properly require age and consent verification for the individuals who upload the video and every single individual in the video. So if there's 10 people in a video, you need the age and consent verified of every single one of them and the uploader, because there's numerous cases of human traffickers uploading videos. That was one of the very first cases on Pornhub that we saw with the trafficker from Florida with a 15-year-old girl. 58 videos of her underage were uploaded, and he even had a verified account. So there's an act called the Protect Act. That's one bill that would require age and consent verification, and that's something we really want to see, not just Pornhub, like every porn site. But I think whole Trafficking Hub campaign shows how effective it was to not just speak about the harms of tube sites in general, but to look at the most famous website and be like, if even this website that most people think is the most above board, if even on this site it's illegal content is happening and being uploaded, then we need to change the laws on this one. And if we can do it on this one, then there's hope for all of them.
I agree with almost everything you said now, but there was a time when I didn't. But one thing that I do have to challenge you on is you said that uploaders should have their age and consent checked, and there should be a law passed to force porn sites to do that. And this is what I mean about that when laws like that are passed specifically against the porn industry, and it's singled out when like Pornhub is just social media. That's all it is. Like, why isn't Reddit going to have the same rules? Why isn't Twitter going to have the same rules? Because it's like, this
Well,
is
I
when
agree with
you
that,
get the free
and
speech
we're
coalition
calling for that
involved,
as
and
well
it's
too. I think Twitter
okay.
is like, we've spoken a lot about Twitter as well, and we've made videos highlighting how horrific Twitter is, and
Facebook, just I think a majority of this stuff happens in group chats, in DMs. Telegram is another big one. I don't know if
Discord.
you know about, yeah,
Yeah.
Telegram especially, because I know there's some groups on there where they will put photos of girls and then they'll charge them money to take them down. So they'll actually like,
No, that's so awful.
it's nasty, nasty stuff.
Something that does distinguish Facebook from Pornhub, though, is around the time that Facebook had around 10 to 15,000 moderators, Pornhub only had 20 to 30, and multiple whistleblowers have confirmed that. And so I think that most people uploading content to Facebook, obviously Facebook is used by a larger population, but most content uploaded to Facebook isn't pornographic. And if you've got that many thousands of moderators, I feel like Facebook are showing that they are taking this more seriously. And they gave a lot more reports to NCMEC. For years, Pornhub didn't give any. And they only started to at the end of 2020, early 2021, when that pressure was put on them. And they said before the Canadian Parliament, we're a proud partner of NCMEC, the National Centre on Missing and Exploited Children. And in the next parliamentary hearing, the director of NCMEC came on and said, we do not and have never had a partnership with Pornhub. Like, they don't make reports to us. So
it's good. I saw like them do a tweet against Pornhub once, I think. So yeah, I'd be surprised at that as well. Yeah, no, but I think we could talk about that for hours. But your film about, I want to say extreme porn or abusive porn. You've called it hardcore, and I kind of have an issue with the title because I think it's one of my only criticisms of the film is that for me, hardcore is just any porn that shows like penis and vagina. And softcore is, kind of above the waist.
So I looked it up online after you gave me that feedback, and hardcore, the definition of hardcore pornography is pornography that is very explicit or extreme. And I think it was partly, a twist on the main character in the film, who is Max Hardcore, and that being his last name. But I think in the minds of most people, the term hardcore relates to more just extreme or violent or gangbangs, gonzo, like porn that's more than softcore.
It's just in the industry, we often film a hardcore and a softcore version at the same time. So for us, it's like, this isn't hardcore, it's all hardcore, So, but yeah, so it was interesting. But
yeah, I really want to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I've got quite a lot actually. And so just to give people an idea, so it's called Hardcore and it's on the Magic Lantern YouTube channel. And it's a really difficult to watch documentary. And you're censoring the things that are happening in that video. On one part, it's animated. And even then, it's so difficult to watch. Like, I'm in the industry and I'm quite desensitized to most things, but I'm watching it with a really heavy heart. Like, it's the way it makes me feel just watching those clips. And people are getting off on this. Like people are watching the uncensored full thing. And we're talking about girls breaking down, girls being hurt, girls vomiting, girls being beaten, really, for pleasure, and for the pleasure of the performer and for the pleasure of the viewing public. And yeah, I guess that's the bit that's shocking. And even though I know about all this and it's something I'm campaigning against, it's so hard to watch.
Yeah.
It's Was this new for you, or is it something you've been working on for a long time? Did you know about how bad it would be?
Um, so just even to give the context as to how this film came about, um, after my boss made the first film, Nefarious Merchant of Souls, he was just really haunted by this question, like what kind of society is willing to produce so many men who are willing to buy women and children, like trafficking victims for sex? Like, where does this come from? He'd spent a couple of years focusing on the stories of the victims and wanted to really consider the roots and the demand. And so began a sort of investigatory documentary making journey, just interviewing people, the attitudes of sex, sex buyers, went to the porn industry, had a few interviews lined up, and explained that it's making a documentary about attitudes to sex in America, investigating the porn industry. And some of these interviews began several years ago. So it's been a 10-year journey of making this film, or maybe even 11.
Wow.
And so some of the scenes or interviews in the series were more recent, but that journey began, around 10 years ago. And I think for him, one interview led to another, and lots of doors opened to be interviewed. And Benji was just really asking the deeper questions. You can kind of hear some of the questions that he's asking in the film.
Yeah.
He's really trying to
I
get
thought
to
his
the
interview
heart of
technique
what's
was really
happening.
good in this one. It was
Yeah.
really good.
And the things that he uncovered were just so disturbing to him. He didn't even really know, like, what do I do with this footage? He couldn't believe that the folks he interviewed were sharing the things that they were with him on camera, like basically confessing to criminal activity. And so from the footage, we decided to create this trilogy. Originally, it was just one documentary, but it just was like too hard to watch all in one go. So we split it into 3 episodes, one focusing on the barely legal teen porn genre and the fetishization of children and underage teen girls, one looking at the STD crisis. That was the second episode, Unsafe Sex. And the third episode, which comes out March 23rd on the YouTube channel, like you said, is focused on the hardcore violent genre of porn, the BDSM genre and fetish. And every person interviewed is someone formerly or currently in the porn industry. And every time I watch it, I feel sick to my stomach or I want to cry. And I think it's one of the most important documentaries ever made. Nothing has pulled back the curtain on this topic more than this film, I believe. And even though it is so hard-hitting to watch, I think some of the most important things in life are important to hear, are important to see, and just know that, like, every scene we've considered so carefully over the years. Even the scene that you mentioned that was animated, we really wanted to protect the people in the scenes as much as possible, while still showing enough to help people understand what is really going on. So it just shows the tip of the iceberg of what is taking place, and we blur several faces, but the interviews themselves are chilling, like really eye-opening.
Yeah. And I think let's go through it kind of more in order of my notes.
Yeah,
Because
of course.
the first thing I wrote down was, why Max Hardcore? Because I don't, like, he's a problem. I think he's an evil human. He even looks wrong. I don't know. I mean, I've been to Cambodia. I went to Cambodia, and the most disturbing thing about being in Cambodia for me was you just see pedophiles walking around, and they look like pedophiles. They look exactly like pedophiles, like you expect them to look. And for me, Max Hardcore looks like a pedophile. He's like super creepy and takes pleasure in hurting girls and dressing them like children and all this stuff. And
Yeah.
and I've never, in my time in the porn industry, which has been 10 years, I've never seen him around the porn industry. I've never seen anyone talk about him favorably or as part of the porn industry. Part of that could be some elitism, where I tend to work with the top stars or top stars in Europe or America, depending on where I'm working. And maybe I forget that there is a fringe industry as well. But is Max still working, and why Max?
So I think he has, he's in the AVN Hall of Fame. He still goes to the award shows year after year. And Eric Swiss, who is his kind of protege in the film, the way that he even talks about him attributes a real influence around that amateur genre of porn that Max, at least in his own eyes, really pioneered. And
I was shocked that he was saying that. I was
Really?
like, what is he talking about? Because I don't know if he did pioneer it. Maybe he did, but I don't know.
That's how others spoke about him to us, and certainly how he sees himself. I think he has, over the years, become a bit more of a pariah to some people, but he is still making porn. He's still active on social media. He's still around, and he did go to prison for a few years for breaking some obscenity laws. But as far as like a lot of the real violent crimes, he's never been held fully accountable. And so I hope that this episode even really like brings some things to light of things that he's said and done.
It's really interesting as well about him being in the AVN Hall of Fame, because AVN keep getting this stuff wrong, and they can just say like, "Hey, we're taking this away." But like, they awarded that to Ron Jeremy, I think, at the time of all his Me Too and outrage, when the porn industry was against him. They awarded him an AVN Hall of Fame, and I don't know what the industry media is playing at, but.
Yeah, I mean, Rocco Siffredi just got an international award recently, and there's some allegations.
I sent AVN and XBiz the allegations, and XBiz banned me from the industry forum, and they both ignored it. So it's incredible. And then I guess before we go into like Max anymore, the one thing I disagreed with in the film was on BDSM. I just felt it was really unfair to put BDSM as in the same category as abusive or extreme porn. Because if you're making BDSM porn or you're in the BDSM community, there's so much emphasis on being safe, sane, and consensual. And it's very, very well codified. And if you're not following that, it's not BDSM really, it's abuse. So I would say that it's like BDSM is probably one of the most safe spaces to explore your sexuality. And even on video, you'll see in lots of BDSM scenes, the consent process is shown as part of the scene. I think there could be a problem if there's BDSM porn being made where maybe the people involved are not BDSM practitioners, they're just exploiting the niche, you know? But I don't know, for me, I found it really difficult. I found it a really difficult pill to swallow because it felt unfair for me.
I think that whole conversation requires even just taking a step back and zooming out and really analyzing that whole genre of sexuality and that whole community, which was on the fringes of society for a long time. And in recent years, I feel has been more accepted into mainstream, and with like the 50 Shades of Grey phenomena from several years ago. I did outreach at the AVN Awards in Vegas before COVID, and remember in the BDSM section of the whole awards, it was the expo, there were all these different tables and booths selling different leather whips. And there was a woman tied up in the corner, like with her arms tied up and bent over. And there was a line of guys holding different types of whips to test out these whips on her by whipping her. And I walked past and I saw what was going on, and someone behind a table offered me a whip. They were like, oh, these are our new leather designs. Do you want to test it out? And in their world, it seemed so normal. And to them, it was like, well, if this woman has consented to being whipped and if she's making money from it, that's all fine. To me, as an outsider, I saw this girl being whipped by a line of men. Her back was red raw. To me, at that moment, even if she had signed a piece of paper saying, I consent to this, there are things that, like, you under international law, you cannot consent to your own torture. And so where do we draw the line of, even if someone is consenting to something, even if something is getting paid to do something, can we still critique it? And so we feel like we can absolutely still critique the whole genre and concept of BDSM, in that it normalizes violence. And I feel like a lot of really traumatized individuals are reenacting really abusive situation in an attempt to gain back some sort of control as a part of healing something traumatizing that has happened to them. And I've done outreach in BDSM dungeons, even here in Los Angeles. And like, at the end of the day, my heart is just for everybody to know that if they're in a situation where they want to be out of it, or they're unhappy, or they are wanting therapy, or any kind of assistance, that we're there for them. To me, sex and violence just should never belong together. And to me, sex is something that's meant to, in its, and this is my perspective, and like,
It's okay. It's okay.
I think it's really, like, there's of course going to be things that we can disagree on as well. So like, I don't feel,
No.
to me, sex is something that should be always, like, two people who, like, where love is present, where you're the most known, the most connected, the most safe. To me, like, the ideal expression of sexual connection is related to that, not a place of violence, degradation, humiliation, power dynamics exploited to the absolute maximum, master and slave language. They belong in the transatlantic slave trade history books, not in what should be loving, consenting relationships. And so I feel like I just feel very troubled from some of the BDSM practices, and even some of the ex-porn performers that we interviewed shared about certain situations, and even, kink.com have come under some real fire recently as to their practices. Humiliation and publicly hurting people and disgracing them is a huge part of the fantasy and fetish. And even within the BDSM umbrella, certain practices are explored. And I wouldn't say I'm an expert on BDSM culture. And so, like, this is just from the very small amount that I've seen. I feel really disturbed seeing violence so normalized. And to me, being whipped till you're red raw or till there's blood formed, even if someone is not saying their safe word and they're just accepting that as an outsider really disturbs me. So yeah,
Yeah, as if we're talking my personal opinion, I would agree more with you, but I do have a lot of friends who are very involved in the BDSM community, as either in all sorts of different ways. And a thing I've noticed is it's often much, not all, but generally it's a more intellectual community. It's often people with quite high status jobs, like a lot of doctors and lawyers, this kind of thing. And the power dynamic is not always women in the weak position, it's often women empowered. And some of the most brutal acts I've seen and heard and most disturbing have often been violence that women have been doing to men.
Yeah, totally.
Um, and some things like, if we get specific, the one that disturbs me the most is, like ball busting. When I've known some friends who, a female friend of mine, she gets paid by a client to literally repeatedly kick a man in the testicles. And I just think that could do lasting damage. I'm smiling, but it's a nervous smile. So I do mostly agree with you, but it's just this thing about if they're not hurting anyone and they're happy, and couples I know that are in BDSM relationships, they're often some of the closest, most loving relationships I've seen. It's similar for swingers, for example. Although I believe in monogamy, some of the closest, most loving, supportive, honest relationships I've seen is with swingers. So I think that community, the BDSM community, the swinging community, with their emphasis on consent and on like open, honest communication, I think we can all learn a lot from it in normal relationships. Let's say normal. I think maybe their relationships are more normal than we'd like to believe, because I think most people are into some kind of BDSM naturally, because there is always a power dynamic. There is always some fetishization of clothing, because everything we wear, we choose to wear. So everything you wear, it's like like branding for yourself. It's a statement you want to make. It's how you want to make people feel about you. And of course, the partners we meet are going to sexualize that.
I just think when it comes to consent is such like a minimum basic, like to get the agreement of someone else is like, that's just to make it legal. Like consent is the bare minimum to make something legal. And the goal to be truly sex positive, I think, is like enthusiastic mutual agency and like full consent, where there's zero coercion, and someone else's definition might be different to mine with that. And I think it expressing some concerns about certain parts of culture. Like I just think this conversation is really good and healthy and important to be able to like share our different experiences and viewpoints on this. And at the end of the day, I want people to be in a really healed and whole place. And if I was in a relationship with someone and they asked me to do violent acts against them, like I would ask them to see a therapist. I would say, even if you're asking me to do that to you, like I'm not going to do that to you because that's violent, and I'm not a violent person. And I think if you know someone, you don't want to cause physical pain to them. We interviewed a former dominatrix who told me so many stories, the kind of things that she was asked to do. Stories of men in diapers reenacting what she later believed to be were scenes of childhood sexual abuse, where she had to repeat things that clearly either a teacher or a parent or a step parent or a family member or coach had said to them. And it was all in the context of, if I can reenact this scene of abuse, but I'm in some kind of control, or I'm paying this person to do this to me, it gives me a sense of getting the power back. And I want someone to get a sense of healing, but in a proper, healthy way with a therapist, not in a situation that actually opens up that wound and doesn't, and even causes disturbance to the dominatrix, because she then had to really psychologically deal with, I've done some very disturbing things to men, and I don't know how I feel about that. I feel a bit traumatized from that.
Yeah, I think the key is, I think most people in the BDSM community would agree with you. They would say, yeah, if your partner asks you to do something, like they don't just focus on consent. It's like, is the person sane mentally? Is the practice safe? Which is why there's always discussions around limits and what's going to happen. And, what happens after is important as well. So I think the BDSM community would actually agree with almost everything you're saying. Um,
Well, I'd love for them to
and
watch the episode, and I'd love to hear what they.
yeah. I think they would agree. Although it sounds like a conversational moment, I think that you would actually find a lot of common ground with people that are really. I find there is a line, and I don't know what it is. And I have heard sex psychologists say that it's a positive thing for, say, um, a trauma victim to kind of gain control over the trauma by expressing it sexually. And I don't think it's a positive thing for everybody, but for the ones that it is a positive thing for, I don't know if it's a sex psychologist saying that or a therapist.
There is
Maybe we have to trust them. I don't know.
some sex psychologists would advocate for watching all kinds of porn that we would have a critique of, or I don't know. I've been really troubled by some recent sex therapists.
Well, psychology is not science. I think that's what we have to remember.
Right.
But they are the closest we've got to understanding.
Yeah, but there's so much disagreement even in their community around certain things, and so I think, like science is ever evolving, but it's why it's so important to have more and more studies showing the impact and even the harms. And so I think that especially the studies on the impact of hardcore or like violent pornography and consumers who for around 50% in this one study done, it was around 46%, they began seeking out pornography that when they first began watching porn would have shocked or disgusted them. But the trajectory for not everyone, but a significant percentage, is to look for the novel, the new, the different, something more shocking, something more extreme, almost like a gateway drug seeking something that gives them more of a hit. And so I think even just looking at pornography in the last like 20 years, the things that were considered hardcore 20 years ago would not be considered hardcore today. And the levels of just violent and aggressive, like gangbang scenes, gonzo porn, really, really violent and aggressive, like acts of physical aggression. There was a study that said around 45% of scenes on Pornhub and 35% of scenes on X videos show at least one act of significant physical aggression, of like strangling, pulling hair, choking, spitting on. Almost all of those acts were done against women, and in around half of those, they show a positive reaction, and the other half it's like neutral. So they're not showing a negative response to being strangled. They're either showing pleasure from that or neutral. And with everything we know about domestic violence against women and rape and assault, I think it's really shocking that people can still to this day think that, oh, someone in their private life could be watching videos of women being raped or rape reenacted every single day, and ejaculating and masturbating to these scenes, forming a brain neural pathway, pleasure-centered zone and addiction even to these scenes, and it not have any impact on their sexuality. The more and more studies that come out show that there are correlations. And if that's the case, then any genre that shows rape as a fantasy, and that's like the hardcore episode really hones in on that particular point of the rape fantasy, and how in many cases the women who are acting this are actually experiencing it in an abusive way. So there's some really troubling things that the film unpacks. And
I think we've been reading the same studies, because I've been I've been going through those as well, and trying to understand them. I think a lot of the studies on violent porn are very flawed. I think I don't have enough information to have a personal opinion on it yet, but I've seen some studies that show there is a correlation, some studies that show there isn't a correlation. but all of them seem very flawed to me. But I asked a psychologist to have a look at it. So, but I'm surprised. I can't believe there isn't more research done into it. Given the prevalence of pornography, I'm shocked that universities are not studying it more. Especially with how many psychology students there are. You'd think they could just throw a few at it. But it brings us on like neatly to, like you said about porn being more violent and more extreme. And on the episode, you had Mike South saying that. And his opinion is always about this idea that, oh, it's because there's more competition, so you have to be more extreme to get the attention from your rivals. But I don't think he's right about that. I've always found Mike South to be quite factional and represent a small part of the industry. Generally, the more established traditional producers that are on videos and DVDs, which was softer content and who were hurt badly by tube sites. And, he talked a lot about abuse, but, I sent Mike South the abuse allegations about Rocky Safredi, didn't say anything because it's part of his faction. So I feel like he maybe had a bit of an axe to grind there. Actually, in America, I think porn's got less violent, especially since around 2015 when the industry started to take consent more seriously. And I think they've outsourced all the violent stuff to Europe. Now, I think there is still violent pornography in America, but I think there's a lot less of it than there used to be. Like they don't allow strangling, choking in most scenes now. It has to be simulated if they do it. And a lot of the more violent acts have been, at least in the mainstream part of the industry, but they've got this kind of the fringe industry, which is different, I think.
And I think the brick and mortar porn studio porn is still a smaller percentage. Like most people who are watching porn are on free porn, like watching free porn on the tube sites. And I remember in 2020 searching some of the most violent terms on Pornhub that I could think of. I had all these post-it notes on my computer screen so I wouldn't have to see the video results of these searches. But I had a domestic violence nonprofit organization reach out to me, asked me some questions about some statistics. And similarly, I was like, there's not that many statistics out there. On our website, beyondfantasy.com, we've got a whole list of like some of the most reliable statistics that we try to fact check and see, are they peer reviewed? Are they, and some of these categories on Pornhub, strangulation had 157,000 results. Waterboarding had over 150,000 results. Rape, that nothing came up with rape. Like, so they've blocked certain search terms, but it doesn't mean they've removed the video.
That comes from the credit card companies.
Yeah.
So Lolita's banned, for example.
Even some of these terms are now banned. But in 2020, when I was looking them, like I looked up the term statutory and it had 165,000 results.
Wow.
And so rape's banned, but statutory, you can still find a lot of videos. And then, gagging, brutalized, humiliation, torture, screaming, teen destroyed, extreme anal destroyed, plastic bag suffocation, painful anal gangbang, extreme choke, I can't breathe. All of these terms had thousands of results. And I wrote down how many on each one. And to me, that just highlighted that there's a lot of violent videos and violent content on the free porn tube sites. And that should disturb us. Like, these terms are really disturbing. A lot of them are like criminal acts and brutally, harming another person. And in a society where we want to call for more respect, more like mutuality and agency in relationships, less violence against women, less like assault, when we see still so many issues on college campuses. I just think these porn sites get away with all this violent, like illegal themed or even illegal videos under the branding of, well, it's a fantasy. Therefore, anything that's a fantasy is fine. And I think it's absolutely necessary to challenge certain fantasies and be like, if you're fantasizing about raping someone, that is a problem. And you shouldn't go to a porn site and watch videos that that fuel that fantasy. Like, is anyone really going to disagree with that? Like, I don't think I've ever had a conversation with someone who would argue for a rape fantasy, but there's clearly all over porn.
Yeah, there's a really good argument for it though, and that's that forced sex fantasies are not anything remotely like forced sex, and I think like in a lot of not studies but surveys I've seen, like rape fantasies are one of the most common female fantasies. But that doesn't mean they're fantasizing about being raped. They're fantasizing about a game. And I think it's really important to draw a distinction between the two. Like where I agree with you though, again, I agree with almost everything you said. Like when you're talking about the language porn companies are using to promote the scenes and possibly the content as well, that it is very one-sided, it is very violent, it is very derogatory. And I was kind of think like, do I have a defense for that? And I don't think I do, because when I'm promoting my own porn, I can't even bring myself to use the word slut. Even if I'm using it in a more positive way, which a lot of girls will take ownership of the word and use it in a positive way, I can't even bring myself to use it that way. And it is disturbing to think that, you know, using the word destroyed, that it doesn't have any good implications. But at the same time, I have heard girls describe themselves that way after sexual encounters in a positive way. So I think sometimes it can be like the tone you're reading it in your head. And I don't doubt that the majority of it has been put out there in an aggressive way, but maybe not all of it has. Maybe a lot of it is more like destroyed and they mean satisfaction and they're just trying to get attention. Because, language is a complicated thing.
Well, let me just quote Max.
I almost completely agree with you. Oh God, yeah.
So Max
the oracle.
He says, I steamroll, I annihilate, I crush, I dominate women until they snap. And some women I pushed over the limit. He compares sexual encounters with women to the Formula One sport about cars being smashed.
I wrote all this down.
And wanting to capture their shock and pain on camera, essentially. We ask Eric Swiss on camera, like, where does the rape fantasy come from? And he goes down to try and like explain about the power dynamic. But even he begins to feel really uncomfortable and is like, I don't want to overanalyze that question too much because then I'll lose the magic. I don't want to ask where the rape fantasy comes from. But I think that we should be asking that of both men and women, because like rape is one of the most evil, awful atrocities on the planet. And I dream of a world where, rape isn't a normal occurrence for women and even men and boys every day, especially children. I'm sure everyone listening to your podcast is in agreement that the sexual abuse of children is wrong. Well, I would hope so.
Yeah, I've been trying to get the porn industry to agree to that recently, and they don't seem to. So it's what can you do?
Well, that's a quote right there, Tommy.
Yeah. I thought we'd unite around that, but no. But we have to be really careful in that, like I say, rape fantasy is a game. Rape is rape. And I think where the line is, but the problem is that in the porn industry, and this is like what I think the documentary did very well, is you explained that this is not rape fantasy that's happening in porn. Like these are real sexual assaults.
Yeah.
And I would have argued against this so strongly and said, oh, it's just on the fringes, it's not common. but it's absolutely true. Um, I'm like, I've got dozens of real sexual assaults in my DMs from girls who contacted me in Europe. Um, so many, including like gang rapes, um, where the girl was not expecting a group of guys, and she felt forced into having sex with a group of men. And then I spoke to an American performer who, on Women's Day, Leah Gotti, she put out a thread where, for the girls that are not brave enough to report their abuse, she'll report it for them. She received over 500 rape and sexual assault allegations in the American industry. And I was so horrified by it. And a lot, not all, but a lot of these assaults on camera, and they're monetized and they're sold to the public. And yeah, I think that's the key of this film. And it's like, that's the most powerful thing, is it really highlights that like these are real assaults, and not just sexual assaults, but violent assaults. In Hollywood movies, when they have a fight, they use makeup, they use special effects. Like, it's actually not difficult. Like, the makeup artist that I use when I work in LA, she also worked on mainstream movies like The Walking Dead. Like, they can do special effects makeup. Like, they're there all day. It's only a few bruises. It's not like making someone's face fall off. It's like an extra hour or two of work. So we don't need to hurt girls, but for some reason, there's this mentality in porn that things have to be real. But everything else is fake in porn. Like, the men's penises don't get hard naturally. They're injecting themselves with drugs. The sperm is not real. They're injecting the urethra with fake cum because they've damaged their penis so much with the drugs that they can't have an orgasm naturally in a lot of cases. So I don't see why, like, if we can fake everything else, why can't we at least fake the brutality against the girl and at least then call it art or a film? But it's not. It's like a documentary of abuse, is how I'm seeing it now. I'm rambling a bit, but it's still, when I saw your film, I wanted to watch it again before we did this podcast, but I couldn't watch it again, not twice in a row. It was so horrible, especially with all the allegations from other people fresh in my head.
I watched it again earlier today. Just, yeah, I think that's why we called the series Beyond Fantasy, because, like, to a lot of people, they think they're watching a fantasy, or in the consumer's mind, it's their fantasy. But what they're seeing are real people and real women whose bodies have been brutalized, traumatized. One woman describes being in bed for a week after a gangbang scene. And we're still in touch with several of the women from the series and providing therapy to some of them. And these are real lives and real people behind these scenes. And we really wanted to humanize people in porn and for their stories to be told. And a lot of people are angry with us and angry with you for highlighting the stories of real abuse in this industry. And I think that's absolutely shocking, because if you really cared about the people, if you actually think that you're part of if you're proud of the industry that you're in, you would want to help and call out the things that are happening, the crimes. And your experience has been, there's been a blind eye turned to try and sweep it under the rug, to turn away from it. And we, yeah, it's been a really interesting few years of highlighting the real illegal abuse that's taking place in a lot of porn sites. And I just know that, like, for someone who's been raped, like, the most horrific thing that they've ever been through, to not only have to recover internally from that happening to you or being trafficked or some kind of horrific violence, but for that to have been filmed, whether it was on a set or whether it was in someone's basement, and for that to be put on a porn site and knowing that thousands or millions of people are watching it and getting off to it and it's being monetized, like survivors have said to us that like it's immortalized their trauma and it's really prevented them from healing. Like pornography, the immortalization of that on the internet has made it so much worse. And so I've been helping trafficking victims for many years, and some of the victims that I believe I've seen, like the most extreme trauma I've ever witnessed, are people that it was videos of their abuse being put online. And they're caught in this cage, this online digital cage where they can't get free because they just know that is out there for people to see. And there's a survivor that I've worked closely with over several years who was trafficked from age 11 to 14 and then age 14 to 17 in pornography. And she said that the trafficking in pornography was much more violent and abusive than anything else. And having cameras in the room heightened the violence, heightened the entire vibe and atmosphere of the gang rape situation. And these are some of the most dark things that we're investigating right now. They're traumatizing, and I don't even really know how to talk about these things. I want anyone who's in the porn industry particularly to see our films, but some people, I don't want my mom to see this film. Like I don't want to expose people to something traumatizing, but at the same time, I feel like for the sake of the women and the victims whose lives have been impacted and destroyed, who've never seen any justice. Some of these pornographers still have their videos on their website to this day. And it's absolutely shocking and it's not okay. And there needs to be justice. There needs to be accountability. And there needs to be a reckoning and a hard look in the mirror from some of these bad actors who are involved in this. And just because they've been celebrated for decades before and they are in the AVN Hall of Fame, that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be undergo some kind of scrutiny for their behavior, because it's absolutely destroyed lives. And I just want to commend you for having the courage to speak up and expose, even when it's people in your own industry, even when you've had backlash, because this is literally the most important thing to be uncovering in our world right now.
Yeah, but I'm very late to it, and the people that don't speak up, I understand them, and the people that protect rapists and predators, I understand them too. And it's like I can confess here to some of the bad things I've done. So in the industry, I always try to be like an ethical person. I had a female business partner, so we always went in trying to like do right by the girls. But I'm only realizing in the last 3 months that actually we didn't even fully understand consent, and we didn't understand what sex trafficking was. So like there were some simple questions we could have asked, and it would have meant that some consent, like it's hard to say, like when models send us girls, in Europe, they were not telling the girl who they're working with, what scene it is, or anything. So the girl arrives, and then she has to make the decision, do I want to go through with this? And we were thinking, in the industry, the Americans that I tend to hang out with, were like, what's wrong with these girls? They're so strange. But now I realize that the girls weren't giving all the full information, and maybe they didn't want to work with me, or they didn't want to work with the actor I booked that day. And I feel like we were tricked into raping girls. Like that's how I feel. But we didn't know about consent. I don't think I think most people in the porn industry don't understand consent fully. And they just think, I'm a good person, I would never sexually assault someone. And they think that's enough. But porn's like a special set of circumstances. And like now I realize why some girls were strange. It's because they're in like a really uncomfortable situation for them. And then the other reason that I know some of the girls were strange and a bit weird is because I found out that a significant number of European girls on my site, especially Russian ones, were sex trafficked and tricked into doing porn. And they've told me this. And I could have asked. I could have asked some questions. And even some of the ones that were not sex trafficked, they went into porn thinking it was not porn, thinking it was maybe modeling or just like nude modeling, something light. And then on the day, they were pressured into doing very hardcore things, given brutal treatment, abused violently. And that's how they're initiated. And then as a porn company, I've benefited from the ones that survive. And I think everybody, I don't know how it is in America, but everybody in the European industry is benefiting from sex trafficking, or they're benefiting from the brutal initiation treatment that the girls get when they first enter. And I could have asked questions, but I keep going through my mind of, did I just not know? Or did I not want to know? And I'm leaning towards the latter. And so I don't see myself as a good person in this. Like, I'm trying to put all the information out there and get like a small amount of redemption that way. But there's no doubt in my mind that the way I ran my business before, even though I thought I was being super ethical, I took part in some incredibly evil things, and I benefited from some incredibly evil things. And some of the girls, I don't know what happened to them. No idea. So I don't think I should get any credit for this. It's just something I should have done a long time ago. So it's like it's a mess. It's horrible.
Well, I think the most important thing is what we do with the knowledge that we have. And you could have run away from even acknowledging any of this. But the fact that you're in a space where you're even saying the things you're saying, like you're taking accountability and you're wanting to then elevate the voices of those who've been, who are speaking out. And I can't even imagine the mental process that you've been in the last few weeks or months.
It's crazy. Like, it's like an identity crisis, because doing porn for 10 years, it's quite a unique thing. And when you have conversations, it's like, oh, what do you do? Oh, I produce porn. And it's like, it's edgy and fun. And it's like, yeah, but I do it in a nice way. It's ethical, blah, blah, blah. And like, making porn was a big part of who I was. And now it's this shameful thing I've done. Maybe I'll be able to continue making porn in a more ethical way. I don't know. Not in Europe, I don't think. I don't think Europe's set up to make porn ethically. But yeah, it's a real identity crisis in that sense. It's difficult.
Well, I think that finding your identity as someone who's trying to make the world a better place, that's always a really powerful path to take. And I see you on that path.
I'm trying. It's not easy. But yeah, I don't know if I'm trying to make the world a better place. I keep thinking too small, I think. I keep thinking of it in terms of making porn safer and forgetting that it should be about getting justice for the victims. So I think even in that sense, I'm being quite selfish, if that makes sense. But I'm trying to, it's such a shift in mentality for me that I think I'm still processing it and getting used to it. But yeah, yeah, it's mind-boggling to me that you even had to make this film. And it's mind-boggling to me because I think we've both put out similar content, but you put out this film. And it's such a strange coincidence as well, because I never would have guessed 12 months ago that like a light-hearted sex education podcast would end up putting out videos of like Rocco Siffredi sexually assaulting women. And I put it out there and nobody cares. Like not even just in the industry, nobody cares outside the industry as well. That's been my impression. Speaking to Leah Gotti with these 500 Me Too complaints, it feels to me like the mainstream media don't care this time. In 2015, when it was like Ron Jeremy, James Dean, some other performers that had Me Too allegations, the whole media like jumped on it. But this time it's been silenced from the media. So I don't know, do you think that's like just because there's no Hollywood Me Too to piggyback on? Do you think it's just people in porn, so who cares?
I feel like it's really hard to know or predict, because when we even wrote the op-ed around Pornhub, like we had no idea that the level of virality that it would take off. And I think sometimes it's just even what's taking place in the culture at the time, if things hit a nerve. Yeah, I really don't know. Or it catches the attention of a journalist or a few journalists who are like, actually, because even there were allegations around Harvey Weinstein for years, but no journalists like really investigated. Even, I mean, Jeffrey Epstein, how long did that go on until the journalist from the Miami Herald? So sometimes it's like some journalists try and bring something forward. It doesn't like really have a breakthrough of like being exposed in the culture in a widespread way. And then it's an issue of timing, and those things are out of our control. And so with the Trafficking Hub campaign,
there is a difference though. Like the things Jeffrey Epstein was doing, they weren't filmed. With this, we're talking about like girls being raped and it on Pornhub, and we have to have a conversation and a campaign to say it's wrong. And did you try talking to payments companies, the people who regulate the porn industry?
We wanted Visa and MasterCard to be aware of the criminal activity that was on Pornhub, and it's technically against their policies. To not have...
Although they won't say what their policy is, which is amazing.
Yeah, it's very, I mean, yeah. I feel like there's still kind of a lot of gray area and back and forth. I mean, Visa is named in one of the major lawsuits against Pornhub, and that is being pursued. So they are legally being held accountable for knowingly monetizing illegal content. And we just want exploitation to stop, right? And so however that regulation happens, I know some people are pretty upset about the credit card companies being involved, but they wouldn't process payments when it's like illegal content if it was CSAM or child sexual abuse material, child porn, commonly known as, or sites that were selling illegal drugs. Like they have their own regulations, even though, as you say, there seems to be some discrepancies or some double standards. But we wanted them to be able to at least acknowledge, like, you are facilitating and propping up this company, this criminal company that is making millions and millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars.
It sounds like a lot of money, but that's actually tiny. The value of the porn industry to Visa and MasterCard is insignificant. It might sound like a lot of money, but a small cable channel in the US, like not like HBO, but like a niche cable channel, will make more money in a year than Pornhub does, than all of MindGeek. And the porn industry is actually very poor. I know it doesn't
Tommy.
sound like
Oh,
that.
Tommy. I mean, the
It
fact
doesn't
that
sound like that, but
they're like
it's very poor in terms of media.
a quarter of like all online searches are for porn. Like, you know,
Oh yeah, no. The 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 views are enormous.
well, that's how they get
But
all the money, though, from
the
the ad.
revenue is tiny. And the revenue should be big, but because of financial discrimination by banks, the revenue is tiny. So for example, there's like over 1 billion people in India. None of them can buy our porn because the banks block porn payments. No one in China can buy our porn. In many countries, no one can buy the porn.
Most of the money that MindGeek make is from the internet traffic because of their like the subscriptions and the ads. And I think that was why, like, a lot of moderators explained to us that content was king for them, and that's why they didn't take down that. They made it harder for videos to be taken down and really easy for videos to be uploaded. They had 13 million videos in 2020,
Yeah,
and the more content they had, the more clicks and ad revenue.
yeah. Well, I agree with you, but the porn industry is very, very poor compared to like just one media company like Vice Media make probably more money than most of the porn industry.
I mean,
It's like they're turning over like $1 billion a year.
the top guys
Just one company.
at the porn. I
Yeah,
mean,
there's some
they
rich
live
people
in
in
$20
porn.
million mansions. So,
Yeah,
you know,
but that's nothing compared to like a top 10 website. So MindGeek owned Pornhub and what that's 10th most, no, 11th most popular website in the world, I think. And they only turn over 400 million a year. Now, if you like if you look at something like Twitter, which is a smaller website, and they're turning over billions.
mhm.
So it's
I mean,
insignificant compared to the traffic because we're cut off from all the revenue sources.
I guess it
It causes
depends.
problems.
Depends who we're comparing it to. Like, are you comparing it?
You compare it to the traffic, right? The interest. Lots of people are watching porn, but because of the financial discrimination against us, it makes it hard to make money, and profit margins are very thin. So that's just turnover. That's not profit. And I think that's one of the reasons a lot of corners are cut, and it puts models in danger. It means that they can't afford all the moderators that they should have. So I think not everything is the porn industry. I'm not saying that what the porn industry is doing is good. I don't think there's an excuse for it. But I think the relative poverty of the industry is one of the reasons why it's not safe,
I
in
think
my
that
opinion.
if you have a website set up where non-consensual videos are getting on your site and you don't have enough moderators, like that in itself is a problem. And um, it the fight was for accountability and for acknowledgement
Yeah.
for victims. And so it was Serena Fleetez, who was 14 years old when videos of her were uploaded on Pornhub, and took her a long time to get those taken down. And she was the one who, before the Canadian Parliament, was saying this company cares about money more than people. And ultimately, that's what it came down to:
Right.
seeking
I think it's
accountability.
true.
Yeah.
And I think it's true for all companies. So I think like we can definitely agree that there needs to be some regulation.
Yeah, and
But
we've
I
mainly been
honestly
calling
don't.
for
Yeah.
agent consent. The Trafficking Help campaign calls for agent consent to be verified of all uploaders and people in videos. And then the Protect Children Not Porn campaign called for age verification for consumers because we believe in protecting kids from accessing porn. And that's another thing, like the amount of free pornography with zero age barriers, age checks. So on the homepage of Pornhub is so much porn without a single clicking through your IM over 18 button. And we know that button in itself,
Yeah,
any
yeah.
10-year-old's going to click through that. There needs to be a form of government ID that's a third-party app that's encrypted, that doesn't keep anyone's data, but it needs to be protecting children, because otherwise, like, we have stories from parents whose children are being exposed to the most hardcore violent pornography, and it's traumatizing for them, and that's not okay.
I agree with you, but for me, there's privacy concerns, and my solution is just ban free porn. Just make it so you have to pay for porn.
That is one solution.
It's the only like privacy-friendly way I can think of, but it's difficult for Visa and MasterCard. One more about the payment companies is the thing, you were sending them like videos of rapes and things like that, and the payments companies, they always give like a blanket response, like, oh, we don't allow illegal content. And we're both finding that, there's real violence against women, there's real sexual assaults. I've sent Visa and MasterCard real sexual assaults. They said it's not their responsibility, it's the responsibility of the acquiring banks. So I sent the acquiring banks videos of real sexual assaults, but they're still processing payments for the companies that were sexually assaulting girls. And I don't think that Visa and MasterCard or people working at the acquiring banks understand consent. I don't think they've had any training in it. I think for them, consent is, did she sign the model release? And one of the videos that I sent in, the girl was being kicked in the breast. She was suffocated with a pillow at one point as an impromptu thing. And she was being spanked really hard, and she was giving a signal of like stop, trying to protect herself with her hands. And they were just moving her hands out of the way and then continuing to hit her. And they were like just 3 examples of things that can't ever be consensual. So I said, at what point did she consent to those acts? And the producer sent the bank a video where at the beginning, there's him, her agent, and 4 guys, and she wasn't really in a position to say no. Well, they didn't even ask her, like, can I kick you or can I suffocate with a pillow? They just said, oh, if it gets too much, you can say stop. But the bank is accepting this as consent.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that happens so much, though, and even of what you can. Going back to our earlier conversation around consent, even if you sign on a piece of paper, you might be consenting to one thing, and then in a video, or in like Max Hardcore's mind, he's planning for the video to go in a very different direction. So whatever she's consented to originally, he has completely different plans for that, how that's going to go. And so I think that's a really important part of this conversation too, of what happens in a porn video may not be at all what the person originally consented to. But once they've signed that paperwork, or sometimes if they've made that video release before the violent video was recorded, we've heard from some survivors about that happening as well. So across the board,
and I would say that,
yeah,
like in Europe, it's actually quite rare for that to happen. I mean, in Europe, there's a lot of bad people and bad things happening, but it's the same small number of people committing the majority of the assaults and the majority of the cases where people go over the limits. So most companies don't do that. And I'm sure most companies in America don't do that either. I don't know if you found it's like the same people over and over again. And like everyone tells, like, because in the 500 sexual assaults that Leah Gotti put out, she also said it was the same names over and over, like the same 1 or 2 agents, the same 1 or 2 producers, the same 1 or 2 directors, and the same handful of performers. So I'd like to think that it's not the industry practice, or not anymore.
I
So
feel like so much of porn is made in an amateur way or uploaded that is like there isn't video and release forms at all happening. And so,
no, there must be. There has to be.
that was where the whole Trafficking Hub campaign came from, of realizing you only needed an email
Um,
address to upload a video.
yeah, but the majority of porn, I guess I'm thinking, what's the majority? The most views or the most content? Because amateur porn is more popular, but like I make amateur porn and I make it look amateur, but it's not really amateur. So I'd say the majority of porn is more like mine, where it's like fake amateur rather than real amateurs.
Well, I guess, from the Pornhub, from the statistic of them leaving 20% of their site and delete 80% of their site were under.
Oh yeah, but it was all piracy. Like they were stealing my videos. Like,
Yeah,
I mean, my when they deleted it, my revenue went up so much. Like,
like
it was
people who
incredible.
are unverified accounts. They are the majority of content that was on Pornhub was from unverified accounts, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, I don't doubt that you found incredibly bad things, and there's a lot of it. And I guess I'm just thinking in terms of your documentary and the bad people in the porn industry itself. But yeah, like, do you think abuse is common in professional porn?
I think that yeah, that's where the demand is and what people are wanting, and what the violent scenes such as gangbang, multiple penetration, like the top sex acts that are required in a lot of most porn.
Well, they're,
I
well,
think,
they're not by definition necessarily violent. Like they can be done in non-violent ways.
and I think this is where we may disagree on.
Okay, sorry.
To me,
I mean, it's not my style, but
a,
there can be
a
a
gangbang,
romantic gangbang, maybe.
a gangbang with multiple penetration to me is absolutely violent. So
Yeah. See,
yeah, but
I think we have to be careful to label too many activities as violence. Like for me, it's if the girl is hurt, it's violent.
I mean,
Um,
to be penetrated by 20 different people. That's the scene that's referenced in the hardcore episode where she was in bed for a week and recovering.
mm,
Having,
that's the thing. I
uh,
think it can be and it cannot be. Like I know girls that it's their dream to do that, and in porn they're living their dream. And not all girls, but because it's not like the gangbang was a surprise, right? Or was it? I can't remember. Like
um,
she did
what
want to do a gangbang scene.
what turned out well, in her particular experience, she was under the influence of drugs and alcohol, and so there was already like not okay stuff happening on the
Mm,
set. But she later found out,
yeah, so that can't be consensual.
right? She later found out that these guys all weren't all guys in the industry. Some of them had responded to an ad online to meet your favorite porn star, and so they hadn't even been tested for STDs and things. So she went into this having no idea that these random guys who responded to an online ad were going to be part of the scene. Um,
Mm,
and I really think that there's so much happening behind the scenes in this industry that we would never accept as acceptable in any other industry. And so, but the industry operates a little bit as a wild wild west in that they resist regulation at every turn. And I actually,
me too. Like, yeah.
I I was in a seminar recently hosted by the porn industry here in Hollywood. I was sat at the back, and every mention of any kind of regulation that would restrict them, even like protecting children from accessing porn, everything related to the Trafficking Hub campaign, there was no acknowledgement or accountability in the room of the reason why we've been having some of this pushback in the last couple of years is because our industry has allowed and I think there's a confusion between saying our industry, like Pornhub and MindGeek, are a company that are operating with, with their offices in Luxembourg, and there's all kinds of shady stuff happening. And so the section of the porn industry that operates out of Los Angeles is, generally speaking, a smaller percentage. But in that room, I just felt that there was no accountability taken, no acknowledgement of the real harm and devastation caused, and it was just a lot of denial, and it it made me sad. And I hope that I want to see more conversations like this. And
Hmm.
I have reached out to um, some individuals in the porn industry, and I want to have more conversations like this. It's
Hmm.
not easy, and um, I just think that there needs to be a lot of regulations to protect the most vulnerable who are being exploited in the industry and who are being subject to exploitative material, who are underage. And that should surely be something that there's common agreement on. This isn't a left issue, a right issue. This isn't a faith issue, a non-faith issue. Like, this is a human rights issue
Hmm.
that everybody should be able to come into agreement on. And the issue of human trafficking or image-based sexual abuse is probably some of the most unifying things, in that a lot of people who disagree on all manner of other topics can agree on and should agree on. And so we still have our petitions out there. We have other films that are breaking down different aspects of this. And I just want to say that you don't have to agree with us on every topic that we
Hmm.
talk about. Um, that there's I think, another misconception that we want to criminalize women in the sex industry, when we've always called for the decriminalization of people exploited in the sex industry,
Hmm.
but still accountability for the sex buyers, the third parties, the pimps, the brothel owners. And that model is called the Nordic model, the Swedish model.
Yeah.
It's been the most effective worldwide in reducing demand, therefore reducing the supply of sex trafficking. Um, Tons of studies that have shown that to be the case. And I myself went out to Sweden last summer, but we we definitely do not believe that people who are exploited in the sex industry, or who are being sold for sex in any capacity, should be criminalized. And I really want anyone listening to hear that as well, because
Hmm.
it's often perceived that we are calling for them to be criminalized. I used to run a program in jail for at-risk women, and absolutely um, know that if someone is trying to get out of the sex industry, them having a criminal record is one of the hardest things to break out from.
Hmm.
And we are in touch with a lot of survivors who are fighting for years to try and clear a criminal record, even when they were being exploited or trafficked. They have a criminal record. One survivor, who's a good friend of mine, Christine McDonald, was arrested and put in jail 103 times during the time that she was trafficked, and never once offered services or assisted in it in any way.
Yeah.
And that is, like, really wrong and really devastating.
Yeah. And I do agree with like most things you've said. Like, I've definitely pushed back on some things you've said because, like you, I think that we should have been having this conversation years ago. And the porn industry should be having conversations with its critics. And it doesn't matter if they're religious critics or if they're government critics or media critics. Like, everybody watches porn, so everybody gets to say, I think. Um, but I think you can feel in the conversation that even though I've come around to agreeing with you on almost everything, I still get defensive, and I'm like justifying some actions of the porn industry, even some things that are not justifiable. Like, I'm like, yeah, but porn's really poor. Like, we can't be expected to behave as well as other companies. Um,
Why do you think
and
that is?
I,
Because you've been in this industry up until so recently.
because that's what I've been telling myself for 10 years. And it's like, I'm just thinking back on some parts of this conversation that we've had where I have instinctively got defensive when maybe I shouldn't have done.
probably
do
I'm
think
getting
that,
passionate and worked up about talking about these issues that make me really angry and worked up too.
mm,
And so, like, the anger is directed at abusers and the abuse.
yeah,
I
yeah.
think even sometimes when someone else is getting passionate in their conversation, you feel, um, you know,
Yeah, no, and from my point of view, it's just a lot of industry people do watch it, and I don't want them to think that I think all of the industry is bad now. I've genuinely found most people in this industry to be wonderful people, and most people are very kind and they want to do the right thing. But there is a problem with the industry criticizing itself. Nobody will do it. Behind the scenes, everybody in Europe knows Rocco is a bad guy. We all know what he does. We all warn girls before they go to see him, if we can. Usually we can't, because he likes them fresh before they, have been warned by anybody. Um, so, so everybody knows, but nobody will speak up. And I think it's the same in America. I'm watching with Leah, and she feels alone out there, and she feels powerless, and she feels like she wants to do more and feels guilty that she's not doing more. But at the same time, no one else is speaking up. Nobody's helping her. And many, many producers, many, many owners, many directors try really, really hard to do the right thing. And they try to make their productions as kind and thoughtful and sweet. And they want the girls to go home happy and joyful, and for porn to be this like hedonistic, like almost beautiful place. It is a community. Like, we do see ourselves as a kind of family. A lot of people in the porn industry are misfits and maybe didn't fit in a lot of places, and have found a community in the porn industry. And so there's a lot of inspiring things happen, and it's sad that we let predators exist. It's sad that we protect them. But I've also been guilty of protecting them. Like Rocco in Woodman, for example, I've always known that they do bad things. And I believed the allegations against them from the moment I heard them. But when I heard allegations about other people that were friends, I didn't believe them. One of them, like a very high profile person who had some Me Too complaints, even though I believed Me Too allegations against other people, I didn't believe them against him, because I was saying, yeah, but he's a friend. He does nice things for me. I see all the nice things he does for other people, so it can't be true. And plus, the girl didn't go to the police. Oh, she's just jealous of his new girlfriend. I just, all the things that everybody else is saying about me or about Leah or other people that are speaking out, I was saying because I couldn't comprehend that someone I know and that's nice to me could be capable of such evil. And I even paid him to direct scenes for me alone with girls, and 100% I put girls at risk. So I don't know what the solution is to that. And I said to Leah the other day, when Donald Trump had allegations against him, half of America believed them, half didn't. And I thought it's the Democrats that are the good guys. They are like kind and believe women, and they're on the side of victims. And then when Joe Biden had allegations against him, it flipped. No Democrat believed it, and all the Republicans believed. So I was like, and that's how I feel. And I don't know how we overcome that in the porn industry, because everybody is someone's friend. Everyone is friends with half the industry.
I mean, that's an issue that isn't just in the porn industry. Like, anyone who's an abuser in any kind of community, whether that's in like sporting industry, politics, faith communities, sometimes the most predatory people are powerful, charismatic people who are protected.
Just in your own family, if you're abused by a stepdad or brother, the mum often doesn't believe you.
Yeah. And so I think that it's a really, really important thing just across the board that even though false allegations do happen, that is so rare. And for someone to come forward in any case and share a situation of an abuse and an allegation, in a lot of cases, especially if it's a child, like that needs to be thoroughly investigated. Um, and um, yeah, I'm just remembering like the first time that for me personally, I ever made the connection between human trafficking and pornography was actually working with trafficking survivors in Cambodia. And this girl who'd been trafficked, sold by her family, well, taken from her family. I'm not 100% sure whether her family knew that she was going into a trafficking situation or if they thought she was accepting a job in the city. I heard so many different stories of the recruitment process, so I can't exactly remember her how she was exactly recruited. But age 11, in the main big city, Phnom Penh, she was trafficked. And I just always remember because she was the first girl I ever spoke to who told me that Western men from Europe, from Australia, and from America would come and bring pornography on their devices or like read DVD at that point, show her porn and make her act out what she was seeing. And I know that like Asian girls are still hugely fetishized in porn, in the sex industry. And in a recent year for Pornhub, it was like Korean, Asian, and Japanese were all in their top 10 most searched terms. Anyway, all that aside, for me, it's like there are trafficked girls, women, children in countries like Cambodia. You've been there, I've been there. We've seen the guys that you can kind of tell in their eyes. So, it's something about their presence and their eyes. You can just feel that darkness. It's almost like
the
they've
clothes,
done their
they're
humanity
like,
so much. They're operating out of a real dark and evil place. But a lot of sex tourists who go to these places, they are totally operating out of the place of the fantasy, and they're like, I get to act out my own porn star experience. And I've been watching all these porn videos of these young Asian girls. And here I am. And there's this Asian girl for just a few dollars. I can recreate the experience for myself. And that is happening every day. And for this victim to, well, she was a victim at one point. She was a thriving survivor, leading an incredible, beautiful life, was crying as she was telling me the story. And for me, that was the first time I really made the connection even to porn and demand. And I think that it's really important to say that not every person who watches porn becomes a sex buyer and buys trafficked women. I'm not saying that, of course. But a lot of sex buyers, every sex buyer we've ever interviewed talks about a long trajectory of exposure to pornography as a child, and that being where the fantasy begins, and it getting to a point where they want to act out that fantasy. And if you've watched a fantasy 1,000 times, it becomes a normal scene. And at some point, this guy, whether he was from America, from England, he thought it was okay to buy this girl. And he's not checking, are you 15? Are you 16? Are you 18? He's just there to get what he wants. And sex buyers have told us that when they're in that mindset, they don't care whether she's trafficked or not, honestly. They're like, I'm entitled to what I want, and I'm a paying customer. So it's up to
they're a product, aren't they?
people to figure out what's legal, what's not legal. I don't care about that. What I care about is my sexual experience in that moment. And it's really troubling.
But this is kind of the same as what I did in porn, is I didn't question, like, I knew none of the Russian girls had work permits, so that should have been a red flag. But I just thought, yay, we get prettier girls from Russia. That was literally my thought. Just, oh, the Russian girls are more attractive than the European girls we have. I didn't think, oh, is it okay that they don't have work permits? Does that put them in a vulnerable situation? Even though when my European friends asked me about working in America, I always said, oh, only work for one of these 5 agencies because they do things properly. they make you apply with get a work visa and keep everything legal so you're not in a vulnerable position. So it's like I had this like, and I didn't see any, like, there was no cognitive dissonance. It was just, oh, this benefits me. So I don't think I thought about it. Um, does that make me evil? I don't know. Um, it's,
I think that there's an absolute trajectory and spectrum. And when people find out that someone is there against their will, that's a moment. And I know for you, it was an interview that you had recently where someone did share their
mhm.
abusive experience. And that was a moment when you could have turned away and been like, I didn't want to hear that. I'm going to just move on. Um, and I feel like you're even having to grieve and wrestle with some decisions that you made, some in ignorance and
Yeah,
some because you
absolutely.
didn't want to know. Like nobody wants to think I'm purchasing,
Mm,
I'm having sex with trafficked girls. Like no sex buyer wanted to even think that. They were like, I'm not going to consider that. Um, but the most important thing is what you do with that knowledge. And I think it's really powerful for you to be able to speak and say, like, I regret that. I'm shocked at that, and I wish I had
yeah,
asked those questions. I didn't at the time, but I'm asking those questions now, and that's what you are doing.
yeah, it's just crazy to me that I could have this dual approach where I can be advising one thing for going to America, but not thinking the same thing about the girls coming to Europe. Almost like maybe Russians were less important. I don't know, maybe I dehumanized them in some way because I was very nurturing with the European girls, whereas the Russian girls, it just wasn't a thought. So I don't know, maybe it's the language barrier. If you're speaking through an interpreter, it's like you put less effort in. I don't know. Very, very strange to me. I'll never understand it. Um, we've talked about a lot, and um, is there anything else you want to bring up? I mean, there's so much we can still talk about, so I don't think we can possibly get through every conversation. Um, but I've enjoyed this conversation, even though it's been difficult. I'm glad we had it.
Yeah, me too. And I think that like the tobacco industry and alcohol industry, regulation is really important, and I think
Mm,
that is definitely something that most folks can agree on. And big tech needs to be regulated, big porn needs to be regulated. And in the meantime, we made another documentary called Raised on Porn that really shows
yeah.
the impact of porn on consumers as well. Nefarious is the name of the sex trafficking documentary that explores sex trafficking in Eastern Europe, in America, in Southeast Asia. And our films are hard hitting and they're uncomfortable, but also really important and inspiring, several of them as well. And so definitely encourage anyone who's listening to
Yeah,
hit themselves more. And just to say a final thing as well, like if anyone has been abused and trafficked in the sex industry and is um, in need of some professional therapy, we offer free top trauma level um, top level trauma therapy for any survivors. And
mhm.
so if anyone wishes to reach out, they can reach out to me. And our heart is to see people healed, to see people restored, if there's been some trauma, and to see people obtain legal justice. And if we don't have the assistance, we will point you to someone who does. Um, I think in this really polarized culture right now, this kind of
Mhm.
conversation that in some ways wasn't easy for you, in some ways wasn't easy for me, but at the same time, I'm really grateful that I've come to know you and the journey that you're on. And I think that we're modeling a really, hopefully, encouraging and inspiring conversation and heart
Yeah,
that it's okay to to have
Yeah.
conversations with people that you don't see eye to eye with on everything, and that the world
Yeah.
is a better place for it.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope like more people in the porn industry realize that it's okay to talk to you guys, that it's not a betrayal if you do, and that actually, yeah, I think like by talking, I've definitely understood where you come from, and I think you understand the industry better as well, because like like some of the things I've said to you, I think you just didn't know. Like, I think some things that I told you were maybe worse than you thought, and some things maybe weren't as bad. And more talking is definitely the answer. But yeah, I'm not sure how we get the porn industry to open up. I'm really not. But if one person contacts you, maybe that's a success at the beginning. I don't know.
Yeah,
We'll see.
absolutely. And I think before anyone gets into the porn industry, I think it would be really powerful for them to see our films as well, to even see some of the potential worst case scenarios. I know that sounds a bit morbid, but um, like we we even feel like a lot of girls who get into porn age 18, like in high school or fresh out of high school, you can be in high school and in the porn industry if you're 18. And
Hmm.
um, and I know that even the porn industry is changing a lot, and OnlyFans has exploded the last couple of years. And so the nature of porn that we're even talking about is changing too. And I just think there really needs to be some conversations around like warning people about some of the dangers that are in porn. And I personally
Yeah.
feel like 18 is too young to get into porn. Like if you're still in high school, it's one of the most like high risk industries. And I think that is another important thing to be considered as well. And it's often the 18-year-olds that are fetishized to look as young as possible too, which our first episode covers.
Sorry,
Oh,
that's
no,
crazy.
literally,
I'm not.
you have a
Where the flies are coming from.
fly on the wall in our podcast.
Yeah, it's a spy. No, I think the 18 question is it is such a big conversation that we'd probably have to do that another day.
Yes.
Because and also even like the teen one, like you made the teen porn documentary, and I made a documentary um, about DDLG, which is like when people fetishize actually role playing as children during sex. Um, and the people I interviewed had like the opposite conclusion of you. So I think there's a huge range of views on these topics, and I mean, there's full books written about them. So, but I think they do all need discussing. I think the teen porn thing that you brought up was really important conversation to have, and I think we should be talking about it more. I think um, the age of doing porn is also really important. But I think it's more important to have like a wider conversation about the porn onboarding process, because, and this is where it like circles back to sex trafficking, because I had no idea what sex trafficking was. Um, I thought it was like when violence was used. And then I was fortunate that in my old business, we exposed some sex traffickers in brothels on a story that I did. And that was when I learned that actually it's usually like manipulation and lies. And I didn't realize that, you know, if someone doesn't have the full information before they do porn, that that could be considered sex trafficking. So, like, now I know that, I do think there needs to be some kind of universal onboarding process, maybe for every scene, you know, like, do you know it's going to be on Pornhub? Do you know it's going to be everywhere? Do you know it can't be deleted? Do you know, um, but just, or maybe some cooling off period. I think I discussed with you that, you know, if every scene you had like a month to decide, was everything okay? Because they get people to do these consent forms, these exit interviews. Were you happy with the scene? And they're like, yeah. But even when they're not happy, but if they're at home, at peace, safe, protected, and then they can say if they're okay or not, then no one's going to have a bad experience on set because everyone's going to be scared about them saying no later.
Yeah. And
So
I think it's in Japan, and I had a conversation with some partners of ours in Japan recently. I think it's a month that you get to look over the contract and paperwork so you're not pressurized. And then you have up to 4 months to withdraw your consent after the scene too. And they had over like 800 clients who had been trafficked into porn, kind of similar situation to Girls Do Porn, where they think they're showing up for a modeling scene. Turns out that it's a porn scene, and the consent process was completely like non-existent as far as they were told one thing, and even the paperwork, like they would have had to pay the equivalent of thousands of dollars if they'd walked away, because at that point they're told you owe this person, this person, this person. And so it's a form of psychological coercion. And so this is a law they just passed a few months ago. And I think that the motivation is to really protect people from being exploited in porn. And that's got to be a good direction.
Yeah, I'm all for that. 4 months is a bit long for me, but I think 1 month, and apply it universally to every video. Just because it encourages, because for me, it's not just the new models I'm worried about, it's the established models. Like one of my friends, she's one of the most famous models in Europe, and she still gets mistreated. So, and she doesn't have any protection. She's afraid to tell her agent. She's afraid to speak out. She's afraid of even liking one of my tweets.
Wow.
So the only way we can protect people is if we give the models a way of quietly punishing people, I think. Just putting the fear and the pressure on the producer. Because that's all it does, doesn't it? If the model can withdraw her consent from any video, then the pressure is on the producer instead of the pressure being on the model.
Right.
And I think that's what's needed to happen to equalize the power, which I think would be fair, but I don't know how that happens.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we'll see more of a direction of regulation and doubling down on the meaning of consent, how it's obtained by websites, by studios. And the films can be found on beyondfantasy.com.
And I'd really recommend everybody watches the latest one, the hardcore episode. It's shocking and it's difficult to watch, but I think it's the most important one. Maybe I'm just too invested in this topic, but for me, that one really hit home. And even if I wasn't doing what I'm doing now, I'm sure it would have got to me. So I'd really recommend everybody watches it. And
thanks, Tom.
Yeah, do you need to plug your sites or anything like that, or just that one? If people want to donate or anything.
If anyone wants to just track with us or our work, our handle is @ExodusCry. So if you're on Instagram, that's probably the main way. And probably the place we post the most content is on Instagram. And just would love, if you've listened to this podcast and want to get in touch with us and give us any questions or comments or feedback, we welcome that as well. And I'm really glad that you reached out to us via Instagram when you did. And we want to help anyone that needs help, for sure.
And we should make some kind of bet, I think. I don't like gambling, but we should make a prediction. Will Pornhub allow this podcast on Pornhub?
Oh yeah, because you want to post it on Pornhub, don't you? Oh wow, they removed. Someone posted our animated video and they shut down their account within a few minutes. So I think the gamble is all on you as to whether you're willing to take the risk.
Hey, the one with the free ad for you guys in there is on there at the minute, so they haven't deleted it yet. But I think wearing the T-shirt might be the limit. So I think my Pornhub channel is probably going to get deleted, but we'll see. bye porn. Just funny. Or,
And the petition to
yeah,
hold Pornhub accountable is still active at traffickinghubpetition.com.
oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Over 2 million signatures. People calling for
It's
accountability.
incredible. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I really, really appreciate it. And I'm so glad we can have this conversation. It's really important.
Yeah. Thanks
Thank you.
again for having me on, Tommy.